Number 10. Matter Eater Lad. The good old Matter Eater Lad. While definitely one of the most ridiculous powers, there are certain circumstances where Matter Eater Lad can come in super handy. He can eat anything, so if there is something blocking your way or you're trapped, Matter Eater Lad might actually be able to get you where you need to be or help you escape. And pre-0 hour Matter Eater Lad could actually also consume matter at an accelerated rate, both eating super fast and digesting super fast. So not only can he eat materials deemed indestructible because he can literally eat anything, but he can also eat an unlimited amount of matter thanks to his super fast digestive system. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you love superheroes that kind of have, are deemed useless and have fun, weird powers, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9. Bailey Hoskins. Bailey Hoskins is another hero who really is quite useless, but happens to have one extremely useful superpower, at least in the right circumstance. It was extremely useful the one time he was able to use it. Bailey Hoskins is a mutant who hails from another reality, appearing only in the comic X-Men Worst X-Man Ever. In case you were wondering, Bailey is the one who is, considered the worst X-Man ever. His power causes him to self-destruct, but because using it would kill him, it's really never expected that he'll use it. Ergo, the most useless X-Man ever. However, that being said, because no one expects him to ever use it, Riches ends up being easily defeated by Bailey when he does decide to use his powers on him to end Rich's fascist reign. Bailey, of course, has to sacrifice himself to do this, but seeing this as probably his best shot at making his life meaningful and actually getting to be a hero for once, Bailey decides to take it. And while he doesn't live to tell the tale, he does successfully save the day. Number 8. Rainbow Girl. Rainbow Girl is another hero who gets a lot of flack when it comes to her powers. And honestly, I get it. Rainbow Girl is kind of the worst, especially if we're talking about the weird sexism that's implied in her power set and in her character. Rainbow Girl basically can manipulate the emotions of others, with various colors representing different emotions, kinda like the various lanterns. And in fact, that might not even be all she can do. She can basically just harness the awesome power of emotions, whatever that means. Instead of harnessing the power of an emotion to create light-based energy constructs, Rainbow Girl can instead kinda use her power to channel that emotion. While in her first appearance in Adventure Comics issue 309, we see her get rejected from the 30th century based Legion of Superheroes, her powers have been shown to be useful at times. She can actually manipulate the emotions of others apparently, and at one point is apparently able to use them to make everyone desire her. However, we need to acknowledge that while useful, this power set comes with one very big drawback, which is also where a lot of the sexism comes in, to be honest: mood swings. Rainbow Girl as such has never really carried forward in the comics because her very existence seems to imply that girls are both emotional and therefore often irrational. Yikes. That being said, I feel like the idea of utilizing the power of the emotional spectrum is super cool. That's also kind of why we have, lanterns. If it weren't for the execution here, this could be a cool character. Take away some of the weird implications created by her character and her power set, and seeing someone like Rainbow Girl team up with various lanterns while not really belonging to any corps herself, it could be a cool time. If she was just, not the way she was. We need to fix some things, but I do think the idea of emotions as power is really cool.
At number 7 is Skin. This guy just creeps me out. I've covered him before. Mainly because of how gross his powers are, as well as his name, but also because of how depressing and off-putting he looks in every panel that he appears in. Angelo Espinosa, aka Skin, has access to about 6 feet of extra skin that he can use to stretch around his enemies or use as a rope to swing around with. He's basically like Reed Richards, except his bones and muscles don't stretch along with his skin, and also Mr. Fantastic's limit doesn't stop at 6 feet. Skin is just a very unfortunate hero who might wish that he'd never gotten superpowers to begin with. At number 6 is Color Kid. This superhero has powers just as his name suggests, and not much more. He has the ability to change the color of anything on command. Part of the Legion of Substitute Heroes and the assistant to a scientist on his home planet, Color Kid always seems to be in the shadow of greatness. And unfortunately, his powers don't help this cause very much either. Being able to change the color of anything isn't really such a useful power and often proves to disappoint his teammates, especially in combat situations. At number 5 is Arm Fall Off Boy. This guy is pretty clearly a gag character, but he's technically part of the official DC universe, so he's fair game for the list. Arm Fall Off Boy, worse name, has the incredible ability to detach his limbs and use them as melee weapons. As gross and as weird as this power is, it seems like he at least believes in himself, which is something. In one panel, we see him proudly popping his left arm off with a big plorp sound, preparing onlookers to be, quote, astounded by his power. He obviously doesn't have a huge backstory, so it's hard to expound too much on him, but he definitely makes history for being one of the worst heroes, if nothing else. At number 4 is the one and only, the infamous Bailey Hoskins, with the power to self-destruct. This is one of the more tragic superheroes who ends up losing his life after only 4 issues when he finally uses his power. We can assume that this character should land on a list like this every time, considering the comic book series that he's featured in is literally titled X-Men Worst X-Man Ever. But to be fair, this miniseries is known to be a pretty epic read considering the stakes at hand during the run. Bailey has to decide whether or not he's going to use his powers when an evil mutant dictator threatens to take over. At number 3, we have the people of New York City. Yes, even though it's hard to imagine calling them superheroes, at one point, the people of NYC are endowed with a very subtle power given to them by Reed Richards. And the power is to be able to tell which direction is north at all times. This is a response to the Spider Island evil plan set by Jackal, where he unleashes an army of little bugs that give people Spider-Man's powers. So to put everyone back on even keel, Richards decides that everyone should be turned into superheroes. The only thing is that to keep things simple, the ability given to the population of the city is so lame that it has gone down as one of the worst superpowers of all time, and has forced the innocent people of New York City to appear on this rather embarrassing list. At number 2, we have Dog Welder. Now, aside from this guy having one of the worst superpowers of all time, I also just think he's one of the worst superheroes based on who he is as a person. If you're a dog person, skip ahead to the next section because basically this bozo goes around and kills dogs that he finds in alleyways and then calls it a superpower to weld them to people's faces. And he's still considered a good guy. Now, I don't really understand the joke here, but if it is a joke, it's so over the top and weird that I don't even get it. I feel like DC was trying to come up with a meme character here for a laugh, but I don't like the part where he's just killing dogs, nor do I even get it at all. Dog Welder is a big thumbs down in my books, and I think he rightfully deserved a spot high on this list. Shame on you, Dog Welder. At number 1 is the silliest, worst superhero of all, with respect, J. Pennington Pennypacker, aka the Almighty Dollar. Living most of his life as an average citizen working as an accountant, Pennypacker eventually attends the Run-a-Monk self-esteem camp, which turns out to be the most fateful decision he's ever made. After attending the camp for a time, we learn that it's all just a front for a mysterious scientist who's working on completing a device that could give anyone superpowers. And when J. Pennington Pennypacker is endowed with his own powers, he's given an ability that's perfectly suited for his ridiculous name. He is, from that moment onwards, endowed with the ability to shoot pennies out of his wrists at high velocities. Although he only appears in one issue of Marvel's NFL Super Pro back in 1992, the Almighty Dollar is technically an official part of the Marvel canon and must be treated as such.
Number 10, Aquaman. Now I'll admit this one kind of started out as a joke, because nobody likes Aquaman, but I'm not too far off when I say he's got some useful powers. So Aquaman isn't really all that useless. People only really think that because of the Super Friends cartoon, but if you look pretty much anywhere else, he is pretty badass and is often one of the few things able to defend the world against invasions of demons and such thanks to his trident. This is the reason that he's at the very beginning of this list today. Now that being said though, outside of the water, he is a little bit more vulnerable than he is when he's in the deep, but that doesn't make him any less of a threat for the baddies that he goes up against. Thanks to his Atlantean physiology, he possesses superhuman strength, stamina, and durability, alongside marine telepathy that allows him to talk and to command sea creatures, and he's also just a ruthless and capable fighter. No matter how much we all make fun of him, he has some pretty useful powers, so check him out in his first appearance in 1959's Adventure Comics number 260. Number 9, Rainbow Girl. Hailing from the planet Zolnar, Dory Adrison wanted to become a member of the Legion of Superheroes in order to work her way into the acting world. She started that journey after she managed to score a trip to Metropolis by using her powers to win the Ms. Zolnar contest. What powers am I talking about? Well, Dory has the ability to wield the powers of the emotional spectrum. However, she has very little control over it, and this results in some uncontrollable mood swings every now and then. Dory will turn red when she's angry, blue when she's hopeful, and she also has the ability to surround herself in a rainbow-like pheromone field that causes Dory to be found irresistible to pretty much everyone around. She's essentially a human mood ring, if you will. Needless to say, but with these powers, she did not make it onto the Legion of Superheroes roster and instead settled for a spot on the Legion of Substitute Heroes after marrying a wealthy man on Earth. All in all, there are worse powers that you could have. Like, I can see these being useful in some situations, but if given the choice, Rainbow Girl is certainly not the first person I would call if I needed help. Check her out in her first appearance in 1963's Adventure Comics number 309. Number 8. Maggot. As with most mutants, they're either really strong, really weird, or just really lame. Well, Maggot skips the first one altogether and is just really weird and lame. Born in South Africa, this mutant has probably the most unusual digestive system ever, as it houses two slugs named Eenie and Meanie, who are able to leave his body, eat anything they want, and then crawl back into his guts. Now, as gross as it sounds, this whole process helps him grow in size, stamina, and speed, and also turns his skin blue and his eyes red in the process. Pretty cool, right? Well, yes and no, because the slugs have to enter through his stomach in a very precise manner to be effective, meaning if they're even just a millimeter off, then nothing happens. Maggot also has psychometric powers, meaning he's able to see things from the recent past or the immediate future. Honestly, these are all very useful and good powers, but with how meticulous and finicky they are, it just makes for a terrible hero. And to top it all off, he is just not written in a way that makes for any satisfying battles. Check him out in his first appearance in 1997's Uncanny X-Men number 345, and let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with me. Number 7. Matter Eater Lad. Now, I'm definitely someone who is pretty adventurous with what I eat, but there are some things that I absolutely refuse to eat just because I don't like them. Like, I don't know, pickles. I really am not a fan. But that is where Matter Eater Lad comes in, the superhero who literally ate his way out of all of his problems. Tenzel Kim is an alien from the planet Bismol, and much like Stoneboy, Matter Eater Lad's powers are the result of his planet's inhabitants evolving in response to an unexpected tragedy. When all the food on Bismol became inedible thanks to some pesky microbes, the Bismolians adapted by becoming able to eat and digest anything and everything, which was apparently a good enough power to land him a spot on the League of Substitute Heroes. In addition to being able to put down random objects that he consumes, Matter Eater Lad can also analyze matter's contents, determining if it contains poison, and then he metabolizes his food quickly in order to obtain super speed and use his special Bismolian digestive enzymes in order to make tough materials like steel just a lot easier to consume. Honestly, being able to eat anything and everything might make for a great party trick and one that I would love to have in real life, but in the world of comics, it's not necessarily the most useful in the situations that anyone faces.
Number 6. Bouncing Boy. Chuck Tane is just what he sounds like, a superhero with the ability to resemble and act like a giant bouncing ball, which his superhero name is an obvious play on. His powers make him not only super bouncy, but also grant him great durability. While many write him off as being a fairly useless hero, and he did fail in his tryouts for the Legion of Superheroes twice, Bouncing Boy did manage to prove how useful his ability could be, especially considering he has worked hard to become a skilled combatant who also has the ability to calculate the correct trajectories for his bounces, allowing him to target specific and sometimes multiple assailants or points of interest.
Number 5. Stone Boy. A member of the Legion of Substitute Heroes, a group of C-list, moderately superpowered individuals who got together after being rejected from the Legion of Superheroes. Stone Boy is definitely an open book when it comes to his powers because there's not a whole lot below the surface. I say this because he is a member of the alien race from the planet Zwen, whose inhabitants turn to stone in order to hibernate their way through their 6-month-long winters. On Earth, Stone Boy generally uses his ability in some pretty odd and funny ways. Now, originally he was unable to move or stay awake while in his stone state, further proving his, uselessness. So his teammates would throw him at enemies, drop him on their heads, or just use him as a distraction. Eventually, thanks to a bit of hypnotherapy, Stoneboy figured out how to remain conscious and even move while using his powers, but nevertheless, his skills are pretty underwhelming in a universe where mobile rock monsters and heroes are pretty much the norm. But I mean, hey, I can't turn to stone, and I'm assuming you can't either, so who are we to judge?
Number 4, Infectious Lass. Admittedly, Infectious Lass is not a master of her abilities, but if she were, gee, that would be something. She could quickly become the most useful superhero like that. Sept is an alien from the planet Somater. Her people have bodies that house tons of microorganisms, which she uses on her enemies, making them sick. Unfortunately, she's not great at controlling her strange power, which sometimes leads to her infecting those that she does not mean to infect. Still, if she had better control, this power itself seems like it would be quite useful.
Number 3, Jin Genie. Becca Parker was a member of Ecstatics, a group of mutant superheroes who were more preoccupied with becoming rich and famous than doing anything altruistic, like, you know, saving the world. What's her power, you ask? Well, she has the ability to generate seismic vibrations, which is pretty cool, right? Well, no, actually, because in order to use her powers, she has to be rip-roaring drunk. And the more drunk she gets, the more her power could grow. This is a pretty risque and problematic idea for a superhero, as her dependence on alcohol actually landed her on several most offensive lists. Not to mention, it also made her a terrible fighter. When she was drunk, Jin Genie occasionally aimed her seismic waves at her fellow Ecstatics team members, meaning she was often more of a liability than an asset. Thankfully for everyone, but not so thankfully for her, her career as a superhero was cut short when she died while on a mission. Honestly, I'm kinda glad I never learned about her as a kid, because the whole, drinking gives you superpowers thing is not a good message to send out to kids.
Number 2, Angel. Angel definitely has to be one of the least useful superheroes and mutants. At the end of the day, his main power is flight, which, sure, when the X-Men first came to be, was like pretty crazy, and even, dare I say, exhilarating. After all, who doesn't want to fly? While flight is by no means a useless power, the problem with Angel these days is it's kinda all he has, that and his hollow bones. Especially considering he is not Archangel currently, so he doesn't have metal wings with poison-tipped feathers, nor are his wings sharp enough to be used as blades. So as a mutant in battle, he's in theory pretty useless. But his power of flight is not. I would even argue that Warren Worthington III has a more useful power in his abilities as a businessman, which we'll likely see celebrated even more during the new X-Corp comic we're supposed to get sometime in the future.
And number 1, Razorback. Now I have to say, upon first glance, you would definitely not be able to guess what powers Razorback actually possesses. Think it has something to do with warthogs? Well, you would actually be wrong, because its actual power is the mutant ability to drive or pilot any vehicle very well, all of which he for some reason names Big Pig. Now it's not really explained how he got his powers or why he wears the warthog headpiece, but hey, I'm not one to judge. I wear high-waisted jeans and overalls, so to each their own. Also, I thought I should mention that the mane of his super stylish headpiece is also electrified, but that limited power is totally cancelled out by the indignity of having to wear an oversized furry helmet that not only limits mobility, but also peripheral vision, which is kind of needed for his whole mutant ability. All I have to say is that when you're in a universe with multiple characters that are capable of destroying literal planets, an expert wheelman really isn't all that helpful. However, in the real world, that is super helpful, because I know I've been in cars that I cannot figure out.
Number 10, Quintavious Quire. Well, you might think Quentin Quire, as he was previously known, aka Kid Omega, has no place on this list because he is so powerful. Lately, he hasn't proved to be as useful in the comics. Rather, in the dawn of X-Line, it's actually becoming a running gag that he is killed on a regular basis. Often coming in with a pretty decent plan of attack that either he messes up or everything just kind of goes sideways, whether he's appearing in comics like X-Force or Wolverine. However, despite the fact that his death toll continues to climb when it comes to his own death and resurrection count, it should be acknowledged that Quintavious is a master telepath and telekinetic, who is known for being an Omega level mutant, hence his alias as Kid Omega.
Number 9, NFL Super Pro. Now, anyone else remember when Marvel teamed up with the National Football League to make a promotional series about a pun-loving, crime-fighting ex-football player with superpowers? No? Well, that is totally okay. I also forgot about it too. Phil Grayfield, aka Super Pro, had his football career cut short after injuring himself while saving a child, and decided to then take up a career as a sports reporter. Grayfield then just so happens to interview an all-ball chemist and superfan who just so happens to have invented a practically indestructible football uniform. Then for some reason a group of thieves comes in, takes what they want, ties Grayfield to a chair, and decides to burn up the rest of the scientist's things, including the suit. The combination of the heat and the fumes from the chemist's supplies end up giving Grayfield superpowers, which he then uses to pummel every bad guy in sight. What powers did he gain? Well, just invulnerability. That's about it. Sure, that's great and super useful, but other than that, he's just an average person, so if I were any other hero, I would honestly just leave him on the bench.
Number 8. Jubilee. For me, myself, even I originally thought of the 90s cartoon when I thought of Jubilee, that young girl who could shoot fireworks out of her fingers. Sure, it's distracting, but Jubilee was never really as useful in a fight because of her powers. But the reality is, it's not actually Jubilee's powers that made her appear less than useful in the X-Men animated series, which, by the way, has the best intro music of any cartoon ever, save for maybe DuckTales. Rather, it was likely her inexperience that simply held her back. In the comics, it's been hinted at that Jubilee is actually far more powerful than she sometimes appears. Her powers allow her to create fireworks, but they also give her the potential to detonate matter at a subatomic level, which means she also has the potential to create an explosion similar to the detonation of a hydrogen bomb, or even more powerful, a cataclysmic quark-splosion. Number 7. Sandman. I mean, I love Wesley Dodds, and this might be a hot take, but while I would say Dodds did quite a bit of good as the Sandman of the 1940s, as we'd later learn, kind of filling in for Dream, although this was likely unbeknownst to many who were called upon by the universe to do so during Dream's imprisonment. As Sandman, Dodds would use his intellect to craft equipment and create chemicals to use in combat that would render his enemies unconscious. Hence his name, because like the mythical Sandman, Dodds' Sandman would also, put you to sleep. However, without the power of his prophetic dreams, Dodds also wouldn't really be a superhero at all. It was this power that gave him purpose and motivated him to become the Sandman. So I would say it was so useful that it actually took a rather ordinary fellow and made him into something more extraordinary. Of course, that being said, Wesley Dodds, I believe, also served in the military, so he was a hero in that way, but he wasn't a superhero until he became Sandman. Number 6. Color Kid. Color Kid isn't usually someone you think of when you think of, useful powers. And yet, Color Kid actually worked really hard to master his powers. While there are actually tons that he has accomplished, many still think of him as useless in modern comics. Admittedly, the reboot of the continuity didn't really help him out here. However, pre-Crisis and pre-Zero Hour, his powers were more useful than you might think. In the 1966 Adventure Comics issue 351, he showcases just what he can accomplish by changing the color of a kryptonite cloud that is threatening Superboy and Supergirl, preventing them from flying. The cloud is made of green K, but Color Kid, using his powers, is able to change it to blue K, which must also affect it on a molecular level, as it no longer therefore has any effect on Superboy or Supergirl. The implication here also implies that Color Kid could in the future use his powers to help many Kryptonian heroes when they are faced with kryptonite problems, or likewise to help out Green Lanterns back when they had their weakness to all things yellow. So he could be actually really useful. Number 5. Jubilee. When most people think of Jubilee, they think of the 90s X-Men animated series, I imagine. Here, Jubilation Lee was introduced to us as a bratty young mall rat teen who had run away from home and whom the X-Men came across and then decided to take in. One of the first times we see her use her powers, she accidentally destroys an arcade game in the show. But in reality, Jubilee in the animated series really only runs away from home because her foster parents sick a sentinel on her, causing Jubilee to run away for her own safety. And while she does totally destroy that arcade game, she is also young and her powers have just manifested, and she's probably feeling, a bit stressed because she has no home and she has to live in a mall. Jubilee's powers in the comics would develop to a point that they were considered to be not just useful, but even some of the most powerful abilities that we've possibly seen, with Emma Frost once stating that Jubilee had the potential to cause explosions at a subatomic level. In other words, Jubilee's powers could make her as useful or as destructive as multiple nuclear power sources or weapons. That's crazy. Number 4. Starman. For this point, we are talking about Ted Knight's Starman. I would argue that Ted Knight is kinda useless in the sense that he doesn't really have superpowers per se, but what he is good at doing is inventing stuff. He's a scientist, and he's a really good scientist, which makes him a powerful ally to other heroes. He also has used this equipment himself to be a hero, hence the name Starman, but really I would say his genius intellect is simply more valuable than his own superheroic nature. Not knocking Ted and his accomplishments, and I wouldn't call him useless per se, although that is the name of the list, but he doesn't have any natural superpowers, and I think he's been more useful in recent years acting as a mentor for younger heroes, namely Star-Spangled Kid, Stargirl, and of course his own son Jack, also known as Starman, who all ended up using his inventions as tools to give them powers. Stargirl herself is known for her use of both Ted's Cosmic Converter Belt and Cosmic Staff. Also, Ted Knight is no longer Starman in the Prime continuity, which could also act as a point against him. Although to be fair to Ted, I think I personally prefer him as Starman to Will Payton's Starman. But yes. Also, you know, Ted got old, so that's kind of part of how life goes. He retired. Number 3, Cypher. Cypher I'd like to rank a little bit higher up on this list because calling him useless feels kind of ridiculous in modern times. By the way, the parameters for my ranking here is I kind of tried to rank the people that, you know, people see as useless but who are actually secretly like really OP as higher, so I hope that makes sense. I also feel like people calling Cypher useless is kind of mean. It's hard for me to genuinely call really anyone useless, to be honest, whether they be fictional or real world. Okay, honestly, some real world people are kinda useless, but in a fictional world, I can imagine, at least, that no one really is. I can imagine that, so just let me have it. However, Cypher is still one of those characters that people attribute as being useless, and so for that reason, we're gonna count him on this list. But of course, his powers actually happen to be some of the most useful, especially when we consider that they also apply to Cypher being able to communicate with technology and using his ability to understand and communicate in all languages to become skilled in the language of fighting, which, yeah, that's a language apparently. A physical language, get it? Except that he was once again proven to be somewhat useless during the Otherworld tournament when Magic trained him because, well, he wasn't very good at fighting there for some reason, which kinda contradicts the other stuff that I know, but hey. Number 2, Dazzler. Dazzler is another one of my all-time favorite superheroes. And of course she's on a useless superhero list. I like to put my favorites on lists like this because it makes me feel better about calling them useless because I know they're my favorites, so I feel like I can kinda do that. Well, she might seem useless to some with her power over light, which she usually prefers to use from a performance standpoint to create dazzling light effects for her concerts and stage performances. Her powers are actually insane. Although I'm still kinda confused about her powers because she can turn sound into light, which does that mean that her concerts, is there sound playing? Can you still hear it? I still have questions about that. I don't know if that's been answered. If it has been answered and I missed it somewhere, please let me know in the comments. It's more that Dazzler isn't as often drawn to heroics that makes her a sometimes useless superhero. Though I will say, although she has in general preferred to try and resist the call of heroism whenever she is thrown into a mission or a scrap, she actually performs pretty admirably. And as we've learned, Alison Blair's powers are also impressive, with her power limits even being still somewhat questioned and defined in the comics in modern day, in terms of just how great they are. She's got a lot of potential. Never forget that even Galactus acknowledged how powerful Daz could be when he made her one of his heralds for a short time. In fact, he probably wouldn't have actually even released her if Daz herself hadn't requested to be free of the obligation. She was kind of the one that was like, look, like, this is cool and all, but I gotta go be a singer, so send me back, man. Number 1, Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl is one of my all-time favorite superheroes characters. I love Doreen, you know this, but I cannot ignore the fact that on paper, when I write it all down, her powers, her mutation, well, it does all sound pretty ridiculous. And she should, by all intents and purposes, not be as OP as we know her to be. However, that being said, I feel like we need to acknowledge the fact that her powers, or more likely her people skills, are insanely useful and insanely powerful. Squirrel Girl has the ability to befriend pretty much anyone, no matter their alignment, and is really, and I mean really, good at helping convince criminals to call it quits, either for the day or for the rest of their life, reforming them in some cases permanently, or you know, as permanently as one can in comics, with just a quick pep talk. This means that often when Squirrel Girl is involved, she doesn't even have to fight villains to stop them. And even in the cases where she has had to fight, she has fared, in most cases, surprisingly well. So while she might seem useless, is she really? I feel like if I was picking the name for this list in terms of its title, that's really what I would call it. I would call it superheroes who seem useless but are really super powerful. So that's the true title of the list to me, in my interpretation, in my heart.
At number 10 is the infamous Gold Balls, aka Egg. Mentioned a handful of times already on this channel, Gold Balls is one of the more bizarre mutants to be given as much panel time as he has. Part of the new generation of mutants, Fabio Medina can summon golden balls on command, which don't actually have any destructive or useful properties whatsoever, at least on their own. Although it is soon discovered that when combined with the powers of 4 other mutants, Gold Balls is able to create a force field of immortality that can resurrect fallen mutants and protect others from death on the island of Krakoa. So there is, after all, a pretty impressive use for Fabio's abilities, but only when paired with the powers of 4 other mutants. On his own, he just squeezes onto this list. At number 9 we have Matter Eater Lad. This guy has a pretty rough set of powers which allow him to metabolize just about anything he swallows. That's right, the enzymes in his stomach are so strong that he can break down and digest anything no matter how large, even if they're radioactive and or otherwise damaging. Now, although he is a pretty silly superhero, Matter Eater Lad isn't at the number 1 spot because I can in some sense see how this power might be of use in the right situation. For example, let's say you have to get rid of a bomb that's about to explode. The chances are that this guy will be able to eat that problem away. Or if you need to get rid of a parasite that's threatening to take over the world, he could simply gobble it up so it can't repopulate. So yes, on paper, a hero with superpowered stomach enzymes sounds like a total joke, but I would only say he's mostly a joke. At number 8 is Rainbow Girl. Hailing from the DC universe, Rainbow Girl has the ability to use the colors of the rainbow to take on any human emotion she desires on command. Red represents anger, blue, hope, and green, willpower, and they all make up a pretty bad superhero, if we're being honest. Online, this character is even viewed as a symbol of an older time when male writers were a lot more simplistic and offensive with their portrayals of female characters. And if these emotion-driven powers based on the colors of the rainbow don't hit that home, her pheromone shield should be a hint that this is true, since that power is used to make her the most popular girl around.
Number 7, Mr. Immortal. Craig Hollis, the leader and founder of the Great Lakes Avengers. Now you can probably guess what his powers are, right? He has the ability to heal and resurrect himself from any injury he faces, no matter how severe it might be, effectively making him immortal. He discovered the skill after several suicide attempts and eventually decided to make the best of it and fling himself into danger without fear because, I mean, if you can't die, what is there to really be scared of? The only real problem related to this insanely useful power is that he can still feel pain. And whenever he comes back to life, he goes into these crazy fits of rage because of how much pain he goes through while coming back to life. The only one who could calm him down was Dinosaur, his quote-unquote soulmate. However, after her death, there was no one able to really help him. Honestly, that's about it for this character if I'm being honest. Although he has this amazing power, he is incapable of using it to its full potential because he lacks training. Basically, he is just a walking, talking, raging punching bag that has died a total of 21 plus times. Check him out for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1989's West Coast Avengers, Volume 2, number 46. Number 6, Doorman. Another member of the Great Lake Avengers on our list today, Damar Davis aka Doorman is a guy who can use his body to make a door, as you know, his name states. Put a little less simply, Doorman is a class 10 teleporter with his body acting as a portal to the Dark Force dimension, and thanks to this connection he can allow people and items to pass through him and walk through any solid object that he is pressed up against. This was the only power he had for a pretty long time, although he did eventually gain the ability to levitate, which led to flight. But in regards to his main power, it's pretty cool in theory, but it only allows people to go to the room or space directly next to them, which is great, you know, if you're trying to make a quick getaway to confuse someone, but if you need a quick escape to, you know, anywhere else, then I think you're out of luck. Also, in a world of superpowered beings who can literally break down walls, teleport long distances, and even just straight up pick locks, he's not the most useful to have on your team, you know? In short, great power in theory, in practice, not so much. Check him out for yourself in his first appearance in 1989's West Coast Avengers Volume 2, number 46. Number 5, Color Kid. Born on the planet Lupra, Ulivak got his powers when he was hit by a beam of colorful light from another dimension while working in a science lab. The accident imbued him with the ability to change the color of any object, no matter how big or small, and then from then on he was known as Color Kid. Needless to say, but his ability was underwhelming to say the least, and he was denied acceptance into DC's Legion of Heroes and instead was forced to join the Legion of Substitute Heroes, which is essentially the B team, but probably more like the C team for superpowered crime fighters. I will say though, Color Kid did manage to make the most of his pretty useless skills. His color change abilities not only changed the hue of an object, but on at least one occasion was able to change the chemical makeup of the object, and was able to save Superboy and Supergirl from a deadly kryptonite cloud. Not only that, he figured out how to tweak his ability to throw off his enemies and to camouflage himself and others around him. Check him out for yourself in 1966's Adventure Comics number 342. Number 4. Cypher. Doug Ramsey was always closely related to Charles Xavier and his school for gifted youngsters from a very young age, as his dad was a lawyer who helped Xavier figure out all the legal aspects of everything. However, he wasn't actually a part of the school despite Xavier believing him to be a mutant. Doug's mutant power gave him the ability to understand and speak any language, human and alien alike, and while that is really impressive and would definitely come in handy, it's not super useful as a superhero, you know? This had the unintended effect of making Cypher a really annoying addition to the X-Men roster. He actually proved to be so annoying that a ton of fans wrote in begging him to be killed off. Realizing Cypher brought nothing to the table, series writer Louise Simonson complied. But every Marvel fan knows that deaths in comics are never permanent, and he was eventually resurrected, but he still sucked so much, even though he had new powers including advanced computer skills and also the ability to sense structural weaknesses in buildings. You know, he honestly just wasn't meant to be a superhero, I think. Take a look at this underwhelming hero story for yourself, starting with 1984's New Mutants number 13. Number 3. Almighty Dollar. With one of the best names in comic books ever in my opinion, J. Pennington Pennypacker was just an average certified public accountant before he attended a self-esteem camp known as Camp Run Amok. Turns out the camp was actually a front for a deranged scientist to use a special device to give people superpowers, and after being given superpowers without their consent, Pennypacker and his friends decided to put their abilities to good use by not only putting a stop to their captors, but also joining the NFL Super Pros crime fighting unit, earning themselves the name the Happy Campers. What was the power he gained, you ask? Well, J. Pennington Pennypacker gained the ability to shoot pennies out of his wrists. That's it. The only reason he's high up on this list today is because his power is actually kind of useful, just not in any battle unless it's a contest for who has the most money. Now that I think about it, we don't actually use pennies here in Canada anymore, so it might be pretty useless power in this day and age, but you know, whatever. Check him out for yourself alongside the other Happy Campers in 1992's NFL Super Pro number 10. Number 2. Friendly Fire. Now, not a whole lot is known about Friendly Fire, as in we don't know his real name, and his origins are pretty up in the air. With the power to shoot bolts of energy out of his hands, this superhero had the ability to easily be Section 8's strongest team member, but as his name would imply, Friendly Fire could only strike his allies. Sort of. He was a terrible shot, so he constantly hit his friends and not the villains they were facing off against. Once a member of the hero team Section 8, which was basically just a big old group of heroes that nobody else wanted to team up with. I mean, come on, their members consisted of a guy who carried around a window to throw at people, and another guy who just welded dead dogs to villains. Friendly Fire really looked like a superstar compared to these guys. His final adventure was probably the worst out of all of them though, because instead of hitting the villain with his powers, he ended up just straight up blowing off his own head. Check out this tragic yet hilarious story for yourself in 1997's Hitman number 18. And number 1, Hindsight Lad. Carlton LaForge, the all-around nerd misfit who just blackmailed his neighbor Speedball into letting him join the New Warriors, which they begrudgingly allowed. Now calling himself Hindsight Lad, Carlton was best described as the most annoying character on the planet, using the only ability he possessed to help the team. The ability to analyze how things could have gone better after a failed mission. Yep, that's right, Hindsight Lad was that guy. The know-it-all who only tells you what you need to know after it's too late to be of any use. During the Civil War arc, the powerless Hindsight suddenly became bigoted against his former New Warrior teammates, even running an anti-New Warriors website where he effectively doxed them by revealing their secret identities. Oh, and not to mention he laundered official Avengers funds to buy himself a new costume. I will give him this though, I guess this ability is kind of useful so you know what not to do next time, but from experience, I am really not a fan of people like this, so I would hate every second of being on a team with him. Check out probably the most punchable character in all of comic books in his first appearance in 1993's New Warriors Annual number 3.
Number 10. Dazzler. I am really loath to put Dazzler on this list at all. Just feels bad. If you've been watching Top 10 Nerd for a while, then you likely know I am a big Alison Blair fan. I became one after I read through some of her original series and I fell in love with Alison, and I also fell in love with her power set. I actually really like it. However, as I've said before, having some of the worst powers doesn't mean that you're a bad character. It doesn't even mean that your powers are really all that bad. After all, it's kinda just in how you use them. But Allison, as Daz, typically prefers to use her powers to add light effects to her shows as a performer. She's been a superhero before, yes, and we've seen her do some pretty crazy things with her powers, yes, but it's not the life that she likes to live. She would actually rather downplay her abilities somewhat in terms of heroics, and then just use them to make pretty light shows in addition to her masterful singing abilities for people to enjoy, which makes them, I guess, the worst in terms of like superhero stuff. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Go check out Most Amazing Top 10 Anime. It's our newest channel, it's super exciting, and who knows, maybe one day I'll even go on and do an anime list for some reason. Could be fun. Number 9, Mr. Fantastic. This might be a massive hot take, but hey, I'm going for it. You can come for me in the comments if you want to. That's fine. Well, I think Mr. Fantastic as a character is pretty cool, and his brilliance definitely cannot be denied. His power set has to be one of the worst amongst the people on his team. Am I right or am I right? I mean, Johnny Storm is the Human Torch who can fly around and literally engulf himself in flames. How cool is that? Ben Grimm is the Thing, who is tough and strong enough to face off against the Hulk, and Susan Storm Richards is Invisible Woman, the real powerhouse of the team who can turn invisible and create force fields big or small enough to defend against or defeat almost any opponent. Now, what does Mr. Fantastic have? He can stretch. Really good? It's really more useful in specific circumstances, so that's why he's making my cut. Number 8, Bouncing Boy. Bouncing Boy is a member of the Legion of Superheroes. While other names have been suggested for Charles Tane, Bouncing Boy is the one that is stuck. And when I explain his powers, you're gonna see why we went with Bouncing Boy here. Charles apparently gained his powers after drinking an experimental super plastic formula. I feel like that would kill you, really. As a result, he became extremely, well, bouncy. He can inflate into a perfectly round ball and initially would use himself as a sort of like wrecking ball, if you will, honing and mastering his ability to direct himself as he bounced around. Later on, he would also become somewhat kind of like elastic in regards to his physiology, making him more bouncy. Initially, he was someone who tried out for the Legion of Superheroes multiple times and was rejected due to his powers being even too ridiculous for the team to consider. But the Prime Earth/Rebirth version of the character has successfully become a member of that team, so yay.
Number 7, Boomerang, but from Marvel. Fred Myers was born in Australia, but moved to America when he was a small child. Now in America, his great love was baseball, and he developed an extraordinary pitching arm. He became a professional baseball player in the minor leagues after graduating high school, and a few years later entered into the major leagues. Within a year though, he was suspended for accepting bribes. Now with an arm like that and no job, he was eventually contracted by the subversive criminal organization the Secret Empire, and offered employment. They designed special weaponry for him to exploit his pitching ability, and he became their special operative, codenamed Boomerang. Now why Boomerang specifically and not like, I don't know, a baseball? Because he was born in Australia and that is the only projectile they have in that country, obviously. Number 6, Count Vertigo. Now you listen here, okay? Count Werner Vertigo is of royal blood. He is an heir to the throne of Latava, truly the most prestigious of titles, okay? But don't you think for one second that means he has cool superpowers, because he doesn't. Count Vertigo has a hereditary inner ear defect that affected his balance. That's not a superpower. Vertigo had a small electronic device implanted in his right temple though that compensated this problem. Tinkering with that device, Vertigo learned he was able to affect other people's balance as well, distorting their perception so that they literally could not tell up from down, which is an effect known as vertigo, and he used this skill to fight Green Arrow. He'd also use it to join up with the Suicide Squad and checkmate, using his powers to make people dizzy to his advantage. Very nice. Number 5, Codpiece. Personally, I would have loved to be a fly on the wall when the character of Codpiece was conceived. Codpiece is honestly just a guy with a massive inferiority complex. That's what it says on his wiki though. I didn't make that up. Okay? Look, in high school, a girl told him he wasn't tall enough, but he thought she meant something else, and so instead of getting like a broken muffler or giant wheels on a giant truck, Codpiece created a suit that had a Codpiece multi-weapon built into the crotch area. The Codpiece had a wide variety of functions, including a cannon, missiles, a sonic attack, 2 retractable boxing gloves, and a variety of tools such as drills and scissors. If there is one way to compensate, it is by becoming a multi-tool. Look, He's doing the best with what he's got, okay? Number 4, Polka Dot Man. While this character got a bit of a change up in the recent Suicide Squad movie, Polka Dot Man, real name Abner Krill, in the comics didn't have a power. He instead wore a suit that was covered in different colored polka dots. When these polka dots were attached to the suit, they had no function, but once they were pulled off, they would enlarge and turn into different gimmicky weapons like flying buzzsaws, blinding sun-shaped dots, dots that turned into fist-shaped projectiles, and even one that turned into a portal. That sounds kind of cool. The dots would even self-destruct to prevent anyone from studying the tech. The only problem was that the polka dot gadgets and the electronic suit were expensive to maintain, and Krill was just literally unable to afford it sometimes. The struggle is real, man. I feel you. Number 3, Paste Pot Pete. 1963's Strange Tales number 104 states, Human Torch battles the most fantastic foe of all, Paste Pot Pete and his unbeatable super weapon. Now, said unbeatable super weapon just happened to be a glue gun that fired an extremely adhesive multi-polymer liquid that he invented. Paste Pot Pete, otherwise known as Peter Petruski or even Trapster, created a not hot glue gun, and his idea was to use this to commit crimes. As you can imagine, the Human Torch really had no problems whatsoever taking down old Pete here, and he continued to do so multiple times because Pete does not know when to give up, apparently. Number 2, Kite Man. Kite Man. Hell yeah. Now riddle me this, nerds. What good are powers like reality warping, energy projection, telekinesis, and super strength against the guy who flies around on a giant kite? Yeah, I'd like to see the Justice League take on Charles Brown and his giant kite. There's no way anyone could possibly stand against that. No sir. Not at all. Kite Man possessed a variety of gimmicked kites, including a jet-powered hang glider that allowed for quick escapes, a mammoth kite that the Kite Man used to shuttle criminals out of Gotham's prison, a flashbulb kite, and a trap net kite. Although, in more recent times, he did temporarily possess the powers of Titans, those abilities pale in comparison to the might of a good kite at your side though. And in at number 1 is Ten-Eyed Man. Okay, it's a DC writer's room. You and your buds are sitting around the table. You need a villain, but someone different, someone unique, someone who could pose a threat to the Caped Crusader, a villain that requires intelligence to beat, some could say. Then all of a sudden Frank stands up. I've got it! We take away a man's ability to see, and instead his vision will come from his fingertips, 5 eyes on each hand. A brief moment of silence follows as the genius that would become Philip Reardon, the Ten-Eyed Man, has just been created. That is his only power, and as you can imagine, this does pose some problems. For starters, his regular eyes are blind. Also, he is often easily defeated simply by injuring his very sensitive eye fingers, which can be done by tricking him into catching or touching something, or even theoretically giving him a high five. But let's not forget, it has been shown he can only be kept in a jail cell by keeping his hands locked in a special non-see-through box, because with eyes on his fingers, quote, escape would be child's play for him.
Number 10, Sideways. Sideways hails from DC Comics. He was introduced to be part of a new wave of original characters that DC wanted to make mainstays. Sadly, many of these characters did not end up enduring and kind of were forgotten, but that doesn't mean that they weren't cool. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to remember them, because they were cool. Maybe we should have done more with them. Sideways' powers allowed him to create rifts in midair, ripping holes into space-time that he could use to teleport through. In other words, he had the ability to teleport not just through space, but also through dimensions. Pretty neat. However, he didn't have the best handle on his powers, and therefore had difficulty controlling these rifts in regards to where they would lead to. Not great considering how powerful this ability is and how easy you can mess up the timeline with it if you weren't careful. However, it's still a pretty insane ability, and that actually wasn't all Derek James as Sideways could do. He can also manipulate gravity, creating mini black holes, and possesses superhuman strength, durability, and reflexes, as well as a healing factor. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we are doing here and if you want more lists like this, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button. Number 9, Explodey Boy. Explodey Boy was one of the young mutants who fled to Genosha looking for somewhere they could thrive and be safe. However, it didn't work out too well for those mutants when Genosha was targeted by Cassandra Nova's wild sentinels, decimating the island and killing many of its inhabitants in one of the worst mutant tragedies ever. Explodey Boy was one of the mutants who perished in this attack. He has since been returned to life on Krakoa, where he was resurrected, but a zombie version of him also temporarily returned to life during the Empire event as seen in the X-Men miniseries tie-in. His powers allow him to make things explode. No known as phragokinesis, but they were not enough to protect him when the attack on Genosha happened. However, his powers did come in handy when the original, now zombified version of the character chose to sacrifice himself, blowing up to protect the life his resurrected self now had on Krakoa, which sounded all in all pretty good to him. Number 8. Trinary. Trinary is one of those mutants who is actually super useful in the right environment and on the right mission, but not every mission is going to be her strong suit. She isn't as well rounded as others because her powers are really specific. Trinary is a technopath, which is actually, I think, one of my favorite mutations out there. As a technopath, she can communicate with technology and make technology do her bidding. Although more recently in the X-Corp miniseries, which I really wish had become an ongoing series, it was so good, her powers were actually less depicted as blatant control and more depicted as Trinary kind of just asking computers and technology to work with her, and then them acquiescing because they either like her or respect her, or a combination of both. This is interesting to me, especially when you consider mutant kind's current relationship with technology and AI, like Sentinels and Nimrod. Trinary as a technopath is not known for being exceptionally good at fighting or anything like that, and could be considered kinda squishy, unless of course she is going up against anything tech-based or happens to have tech around her which she can use to defend herself, and then she's pretty powerful. So, like I said, not powerful in some ways, powerful in other ways. Number 7. Star Fox. Star Fox's powers aren't bad in the way of them being, I would say, non-useful. They're more bad in the sense that they're considered to be, kinda shady. Star Fox is also known as Eros, originally named Aaron at birth by his parents. He had his name changed to Eros when he was still young due to his love of the ladies and his reputation for being a ladies' man. Eros in Greek mythology on Earth is known for being the god of passion and fertility, so this is pretty fitting. Star Fox is Thanos' brother, but instead of being a notorious villain like him, he would become a hero and even an Avenger. He has a lot of powers, but the one people tend to focus on when it comes to his more problematic powers is his ability to create emotional bridges and connections between people and affect one's feeling of pleasure, which has caused many to feel that Star Fox has manipulated others not just for altruistic purposes, but also for his own benefits as well. And also, there's the question of consent. Pretty big question. Number 6. Red Bee. Aw, I know a lot of people love Red Bee, so I feel like this is a bit of a sad one to have on this list, but unfortunately, hey, I gotta pick some folks. Even if I myself love them as characters, we gotta say some people got some bad powers. Red Bee is Richard Rayleigh, who was a hero from the World War II era in the New Earth continuity, who mainly fought his enemies with his amazing animal training skills and his bee sidekick, initially known back in his Quality Comics days as Michael the Bee, who was extremely intelligent and could also sting multiple times without perishing. No, I'm not kidding, it was a real thing. Tragically, Red Bee was of course killed off pretty early in the New Earth continuity. However, the brilliant part of this seemingly more lame character is that Red Bee is also a fan favorite and has actually been brought back a few different times in different iterations due to him having a small but pretty passionate fan base, I'd say. If you like Red Bee, let me know in the comments. I know you're out there, the Red Bee fans. Number 5. Peacemaker. Peacemaker is one of my favorite characters lately from DC, thanks to John Cena's portrayal of the character in his own self-titled miniseries, but I still acknowledge that this is one of the worst characters out there when it comes to his powers and his capabilities and just kind of a lot of stuff about him. In the comics, you might argue that Peacemaker's power actually stems from kind of his mental illness. The fact that he is extremely well trained. Before the DCEU, Gunn, and Cena made him cool, Peacemaker was Christopher Smith, a man haunted by his father's untimely end and past, who was trained to be basically a killer, believing that any force was necessary if it meant attaining some level of peace. If I had to sum up his depiction in the comics previously in one word, I would have said unhinged. I still think we'll get some of that explored more as the show progresses. We already kind of got some of it in season 1, but I do think it'll be approached from a more real and grounded place as opposed to just making Chris feel like the violent and often misguided lunatic that he seemed to be back in the New Earth continuity. Number 4. Doorman. It's time to get into some of the weirdness that is the Great Lakes Avengers. Being that this isn't the mainstay Avengers team, and I don't even think they're technically affiliated with the Avengers, like I don't think the Avengers want to be affiliated with the Great Lakes Avengers. They are about as strange and in some cases unimpressive as you could possibly expect. Doorman is one of the members of the Great Lakes Avengers. As lackluster as his name is, his power can sometimes be very useful, but the issue with it is that it's quite specific, so finding the right and best way to utilize it can be challenging. Although to his credit, I'd like to say that Doorman actually does a pretty good job with how and when he uses his powers to make himself seem pretty useful. Doorman's power allows him to create in essence a doorway or a door between adjacent areas that are separated, like by a wall. So he's kind of like a moving portal, which can be useful in some cases and, much less useful in other cases, depending on the scenario. Number 3, Big Bertha. Big Bertha. Oh boy. So Big Bertha can basically transform her body, adding mass, weight, and height as needed, and even controlling where the added mass goes specifically in regards to her figure and the added weight's distribution, which doesn't sound too bad on paper, right? But then the other part of this is that Big Bertha is actually Ashley Crawford, who was originally known for being a tall, thin, runway supermodel. Ashley, of course, can transform from bigger to smaller, but to do so, she has to vomit. I think you can see how this is pretty problematic and why this made the list. More recently in the comics, Marvel has kind of tried to redeem this character and her power set, but needless to say, it's likely for this very reason that we haven't really seen Big Bertha around in the comics for some time. They're trying though. Number 2, Beak. Not all mutants get to be as badass as Iceman or Cable. Case in point, Beak. Although Beak as a character is admittedly pretty cool and pretty brave, his mutant power is more a physical mutation, which means that he is evidently not considered a favorite for many X-Men fans out there. Like Skin, who was on part 1 of this list, Beak's powers, if you can call them that, leave him resembling a bird, and he's basically built like one, but initially in the comics he couldn't even really fly. Struggled a lot with that. Beak has since figured out kinda how to fly, or rather like glide somewhat, but even still he can really only go short distances and it takes a lot of work. And even going short distances, he doesn't really have a ton of tactical flying skills to speak of either. Fortunately, Beak is still a really likable person and character, so he doesn't often need to rely on his mutant powers to be of use. Number 1, the Detachable Kid, or TDK. The Detachable Kid sounds like a pretty lame hero, and well, he is. He also isn't exactly a bona fide hero as he's a member of the Suicide Squad, but seeing as how this is a team primarily made up of, reformed criminals and villains, well I mean villains at least who are forced into being good to get time lifted off their sentence, I think we can still count him. I think I'm gonna count him, so if you have a problem with it, we'll talk in the comments. TDK is played by Nathan Fillion in James Gunn's The Suicide Squad and was created just for the movie and the DCEU, but the character does take inspiration from someone else on part 1 of this list, Arm Fall Off Boy, and his other post-Zero Hour comic book alternate, Splitter, who's also another version of that character. At least TDK has a somewhat cooler name, but unlike Arm Fall Off Boy, his prowess is a little less admirable. When it's time for him to fight, he detaches his arms and uses them to attack. Now the other cool thing I gotta say is TDK can actually control his arms using his mind, which is kinda cool, but that plan is still pretty terrible and he's pretty quickly defeated by being shot a whole bunch, both in his detached arms, which he seems to, still be able to feel, and directly in his body where he gets shot up a bunch, so he's instantly gone. Also, sorry, that's a spoiler, but also that movie's old now, so should have watched it. Number 10, No Girl. No Girl is a creation of Grant Morrison's. Grant Morrison, when they were writing X-Men, decided to create a bunch of New Mutants, and all of them were about as weird as you'd imagine someone like Morrison would make them. No Girl, of course, is, well, no exception. Her powers are actually pretty cool, but the fact that she didn't really have a body to speak of for a good amount of the time we've known her in the comics was not really as cool. Of course, this has since been somewhat fixed, as Martha no longer uses the codename No Girl, but instead, after having been given a body by the Five, is known as Cerebella. Cerebella's powers are psionic, but considering that she no longer has her original body as it was taken from her by the U-Men when she was only a teenager, it's often been implied that she actually requires substances to her brain to stay alive. Prior to being given a body again, Cerebella as No Girl was suspended in a liquid-filled sphere or tank and lived her life that way, as a brain. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, please go check out our newest channel, Most Amazing Top 10 Anime, and give it a subscribe. Number 9, Angel. Angel might be one of the original X-Men, but that doesn't automatically automatically mean that he is one of the all-stars or omega levels when it comes to mutants. Angel's mutant power is that he has wings, which he can use to fly. Angel also possesses hollow bones, which allow him to be light enough to soar using said wings, but also maybe make him a little bit hollow and weak in other ways. He is an extremely gifted and skilled flyer, having trained for years with how to use his wings, and he's also an adept businessman, being Warren Worthington III in civilian life and hailing from a wealthy and respected family. However, it's still pretty easy to defeat Angel when you need to. Even recently in the comics in X-Force issue number 30, we've seen him kidnapped and literally had one of his wings cut off as a result of people being angry and frustrated with the revelation that mutants have recently unlocked their own secret to immortality. Just goes to show you how easy it is to mess with Angel. It's kind of sadly too easy. Number 8. Brew. I honestly love Brew, and now his powers are basically the coolest around, but for a while there, he wasn't really the coolest per se. You see, Brew may be a mutant, but he's also part of the Brood, so his mutant superpower was actually nothing quite so exciting as some of the other more well-known mutants out there. Brew's mutant power and mutation actually make him compassionate, which for a member of the Brood is a super power really, as Brood don't really feel compassion, empathy, or sympathy at all like humans do. But for an X-Men, well, it's kinda less impressive. It should be noted though that even though it doesn't sound impressive, for a Brood, compassion is pretty amazing to have as an ability. And currently, Brew is also king of the Brood, so there's also that, which makes him pretty cool now, but wasn't always. Number 7. El Guapo. El Guapo hails from the strange mutant team known as Ecstatics. However, like most who have joined that team, he did not last too long. He died less than 10 issues after his first appearance and introduction. Poor El Guapo. El Guapo is Robbie Rodriguez, and his powers allow him to control a skateboard, but not all skateboards, just one skateboard. One that he happens to form a symbiotic connection with. But even that couldn't really save him, and he ended up dying, actually impaled by his own skateboard. It's rough sometimes. That's the Ecstatics way. Number 6. Peeper. Peeper is one of my favorite mutants, but sadly that does not save him like others before him, who I also love, from making this list. Sorry, Peeper. After all, this is part 3, and I already had some heroes that I loved in part 2, so what can I say? I guess I tend to love heroes whose powers actually seem less than super, so these are great lists for me. It's part of what I love about those characters, to be honest. Peeper is a mutant who, honestly, all the other mutant all-stars that he's interacted with recently have been super sweet too, and I love that. I'm here for that. Peeper's powers have to do with his physical mutation, which is that he has enlarged eyes. With his eyes, he can see things that others can't, possessing different forms of sight. Currently, Peeper uses his powers to help out his fellow teammates as a member of Swords the Six, although he's not really like part of the main Six because they're teleporters. He's not a teleporter, but he works with Sword and the Six to help expand the areas of mutant technology. Number 5. Penance. Penance was once the hero known as Speedball, who is now back to being Speedball again actually, thank goodness. His real name is Robert Baldwin. Baldwin decided to change up his superhero appearance and name following the instigating event that led to the first Civil War. In the comics, this was actually similar to, but different from the MCU and the Sokovia Accords. Similar in the sense that many people did die, many of them, in the case of the comics, civilians. Different in the sense that it wasn't a tragedy at a political gathering, but rather happened as a result of the New Warriors pursuing supervillains in the interest of their reality TV show, which, you know, would later become political because one of the team members, Nitro, went off and kind of killed a bunch of civilians and the rest of his teammates in the process, with Speedball being one of the few people to actually survive that incident. As a result, it was said that his powers had changed due to his guilt, and they could only be activated when he experienced physical pain. This caused Robert Baldwin to change his name and his appearance, being known as Penance, in honor of all the lives lost that he felt responsible for, and wearing an Iron Maiden inspired supersuit covered in spikes, as many spikes I believe as there were casualties, so that he could trigger his powers as needed. Number 4. Tag. Tag is definitely one of the weirdest superheroes out there when it comes to his abilities. He is Brian Cruz, a mutant whose powers allow him to tag someone psionically, inciting a telepathic urge in other people to either run away or run toward the person he's tagged. The person who's it? He could use his powers to take multiple people, but if making them emit a psionic signal that encouraged others to run away from them, the range would actually top out at about 100 meters away. Then the urge for people to run would stop. so it's really weirdly specific. Number 3, Super Dupont. Super Dupont hails from a French comic strip from the 1970s. Super Dupont was meant to be a hero built on French nationalism, but that also spoofed the ridiculousness of American superhero comics as well as American stereotypes of the French. Super Dupont's power set is like Superman's, but he's not nearly as powerful. He can fly, and he's also a master in the art of savate, a style of fighting known as French boxing. Super Dupont in the series is a mysterious figure who is said to be the son of one of the unknown soldiers buried under the Arc de Triomphe. Although how that soldier then would remain unknown, it seems kind of questionable, because if he was your father, wouldn't you know who he was? So you no longer be an unknown soldier. He fights against the Anti-France organization, which is exclusively made up of all foreigners, non-French people. These people speak a fictional language in the comics that is a mishmash of non-French languages, and it's called Anti-Francais, which I think is super ridiculous. Number 2, Dog Welder 2. Dog Welder was high up on our first part to this list, but did you know there isn't just one Dog Welder out there? I know, it's shocking considering that his power set in essence involves welding people to, well, I mean, you know, it's in his name. And it's pretty unspeakable if you ask me. How is this a hero at all? Never mind, how did we make a second version of him? Dog Welder 2 ends up being possessed by the welding equipment of the former Dog Welder and even ends up at one point welding his family. Unable to resist the compulsion to weld, he must weld. It's a curse. Despite all this, he's still considered a hero somehow. He also ends up joining along with the superhero team known as Section 8. Dog Welder 2 is even more ridiculous than the first in that he learns the true origins of his powers actually come from the Egyptian god Anubis, and also saves the world by welding 2 stars together, one of which is Sirius, also known as the Dog Star. Get it? Number 1, Six Pack. Six Pack is the leader of Section 8, the same team Dog Welder is on, both the first and the second Dog Welder. His powers, or abilities rather, involve him having a high tolerance for drinking, and it's been implied at one point that he may, and I'd like to emphasize the word may, have reality warping powers. But if he does, he doesn't really know how to use them. This was something that the many angled ones sensed in him when they faced off against him, and he was apparently able to create a force field, but he didn't know how he'd done it. Six Pack is also known as Sidney Speck. He is generally known for being intoxicated, hence his name, which is in reference to drinks, and in fact being completely sober can work against him. While sober, Six Pack is forced to face the harsh reality of his life, which can make him question what he is doing and why. I mean, considering his power set and his general focus, that makes sense. Fair enough.
Number 10, Zeitgeist. Okay, he didn't actually initially start as a villain. Instead, Axel Cluny was actually the leader of the celebrity superhero mutant group known as X-Force. But after his death and revival, he did indeed become a criminal and villain. Now, Zeitgeist has a pretty unfortunate mutant superpower that first manifested in a very unfortunate incident. Basically, Zeitgeist could spew acidic vomit from his mouth, and he wore a protective mouthpiece in and out of his costume. He discovered this power during a little makeout sesh at a beach where he accidentally vomited and melted the girl's face half off. She did survive, but the real kicker is he can't even remember her name. See, he's not really a good guy at all. It was shown that his vomit could burn through 10cm thick steel in less than 30 seconds. Again, not a horrible power, just really unfortunate. Number 9, Armless Tiger Man. Gustav Hertz worked in a mechanical laboratory in Munich, Germany during the 1940s. Now one day, his arms were caught in a machine and were amputated. Surviving the experience and given reading material on how to operate day to day using his mouth and feet, Hertz developed skill in using his teeth and his feet in place of his amputated arms. He has sharpened his teeth into fangs to use as weapons and has above average strength, allowing him to bend steel with his mouth. His toes are also very dexterous, allowing him to throw daggers with them, which is actually kind of cool in a little bit of a weird way. He was an enemy of the World War II hero Angel, which is not Warren Worthington. He was also an enemy of Wakanda, and after death he even came into sort of indirect conflict with Hercules. That's cool. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this video and you haven't already, make sure to press that subscribe button to join us here at Top 10 Nerd. We're almost at 1.30 million subscribers, so definitely get on that. Number 8, the Living Eraser. The Living Eraser is no mere man, you earthbound fools. Sorry, I love that quote from this character, it's kind of hilarious. Kutsahir is actually a Thalumian, and he was the agent of the Supremacy, and as an agent he would use his Dimensionalizer to kidnap scientists for nefarious designs. Ooh. The Living Eraser's Dimensionalizer can transport people to other dimensions, primarily between Earth and Dimension Z. As the Dimensionalizer passes over a surface, it turns it invisible, making it appear as if the victim is being erased. When the entire surface has been transformed, the being or object is transported across dimensions to its destination. If he literally erased people, it would be way more scary, but sending them to another dimension is a fixable thing in comics, so it's not exactly the worst.
Number 7. Stone Boy. Stone Boy is from DC Comics, first appearing in Adventure Comics in issue number 306 back in 1963. His power set is extremely useful as it renders him extremely strong and durable, but unfortunately, he's also kinda useless because while extremely strong and durable in his stone form, he's also immobile, or at least for a very long time was only ever really immobile. This is because while in his stone form, he was technically asleep. That's right. His alien race possesses this stone form because on their planet, the nights are actually half a year long. Their stone form is therefore used as a kind of suspended animation or stasis throughout these very, very long nights. However, Stone Boy would later find a way to be awake while in his stone form, which allowed him to become mobile in the future. Still though, what a weird but interesting power and origin. Number 6. Anarchist. Anarchist is an interesting one. He has powers that allow him to produce acid sweat. He was a part of the team originally known as X-Force before being renamed to X-Statix. This is the mutant reality TV team who films all their exploits and interactions for the purpose of basically entertainment. Now the reason I decided to go with Anarchist as opposed to Zeitgeist is because I feel like Anarchist's powers are more useful as it's easier to make yourself sweat as opposed to, you know, make yourself throw up. However, in either case you'd probably want to be well hydrated when using either of these abilities. Anarchist can build up sweat and use it to generate energy, which he disperses in acidic blasts. Anarchist recently was resurrected on Krakoa after dying a while ago in a final fight with his fellow X-Statix teammates. Number 5. Starboy. Starboy was originally known to be quite powerful back in the pre-Zero Hour days, at least. An alien, he seemed to gain powers from being caught in a comet's tail. They allowed him to manipulate the density of objects and people by drawing on power from stars and using their pull to alter the gravitational pull of others. For a time, he also had additional powers that made him as powerful as Superman, possessing superhuman durability, strength, flight, and even his own electric vision. However, over time these faded and Tom Kalor would grow up to become the future Starman. As Starman, it was revealed that Tom suffered from schizophrenia and that when he wasn't acting as a hero, he was actually living in a sanitarium and had to take medication for his condition to keep it under control. His powers are useful, but he used to be much more powerful when his power set was more akin to Superman. So. Number 4. Karma. Karma probably is one of the most useful powers of all of these people on the list, and that's why she's so high up, but otherwise, you know, she's pretty squishy. Such is the case with a lot of the more psychic or psionically inclined superheroes. In fact, I was watching some Star Trek lately, TNG, aka The Next Generation, and I was just thinking a similar thing about Donna Troy, who also struggles from being, you know, sometimes super useful and sometimes not so useful depending on the scenario. I guess that's kind of a different issue, but she's also kind of squishy. You know how Donna Troy can be. She's like, I sense a presence and I know exactly what these people are thinking or feeling. Or she'll be like, I don't sense anything. It's great. Karma is a telepath, but not a super powerful one. She can read minds, thoughts, and feelings, but only to a certain level or degree. However, she also has the power to control minds, and in this telepathic ability, she generally tends to excel. So while she is squishy and not particularly gifted at reading minds, she can just take control over her enemies. There have been shown to be some restrictions on this power though. A younger Karma would struggle sometimes to maintain control for an extended period, although at other times Karma has also been shown to be able to take control of multiple minds at once. Although I do believe she can only pilot one person at a time, at least that used to be a thing, even while in possession of multiple minds, which is kind of also a drawback. Number 3. Fury. Although really we aren't quite talking about Fury, at least not one of the other versions of this character, but instead focusing on the version of her that is mainly known as Lita Hall. This version of the character seems to have moved past her origin as Wonder Woman's daughter following the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, where everything kind of got weirdly reset and restructured. Instead, we know her as the daughter of Helena Cosmatos, also Fury, who was raised instead by Admiral Derek Trevor and Miss America, aka Joan Dale Trevor. She ends up becoming the partner of Hector Hall, and the two are going to have a child together when Hector tragically dies. While dead in the real world, Hector's consciousness becomes suspended in a pocket of the dream world, with Brute and Glob turning him basically into their new Sandman after Dream's imprisonment, which all happens in the Sandman series. Lita is visited by Hector in her dreams and eventually chooses to stay with him there, but their child ends up being claimed by the Dream Lord upon his return. He forces Hector's spirit to move on and then explains that one day he will actually come for Lita's child, who actually belongs to the Dreaming. Despite her Amazonian-like abilities, Lita can be seen as kinda useless, as she doesn't really act as a hero in Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, and instead attempts to pursue a normal life with her son. That is until her son goes missing, and then she kind of just becomes unhinged. And she also, even before that, kinda is compromised somewhat in the sense that she gets insane anxiety when it comes to being separated from her son at any moment because of course of Dream's threat to one day come and claim him. Number 2. Destiny. Is Destiny a hero? Well, I mean, lately, I'd say, in a weird way, she kinda is. She is one of the few people who was able to stop Moira McTaggart from killing off a mutant kind, destroying them from the inside out. She's also been one of the few who was able to stand against Mr. Sinister in his many attempts to take control. However, ultimately, Destiny isn't winning that fight because we know the Sins of Sinister event is fast approaching. And Destiny is on the Quiet Council currently, which exists to try and govern Krakoa, making life for mutants on the island nation a paradise, and defending that life that the nation is built for its residents. So I'm gonna say that right now, she's close enough to a superhero. I think we can count her on this list. I think we can just acknowledge that Destiny's been doing some pretty good things lately. When it comes to her power set, Destiny is kind of useless if we're talking about, like a fist fight to the death. But she's extremely useful when it comes to her powers, if kept out of the action. More of a guiding light for those fighting that is, better kept on the sidelines. Destiny is a precog and can use her mutant abilities to see the future. The more probable a future is, the clearer her vision of it will become, allowing her to sense which futures and outcomes are most likely. Number 1. Booster Gold. Booster Gold is kind of the epitome of what this list is about to me. His powers aren't really powers that he was born with or incurred from, a wacky lab accident gone wrong, but instead were gained through him stealing some tech in the future, which is where he's from, and using it to travel to the past. Their Booster used his tech as well as his knowledge from the future to try and become a hero, and well, he succeeded. Hooray! However, Booster isn't always the best at heroics. Case in point, the time he tried to give a gift to Batman and Catwoman in honor of their wedding. His gift was to travel back in time and prevent Bruce's parents from dying, but in doing so, this actually prevented Bruce and Selena from ever getting together, and it also caused a lot of other problems. So yeah, he's got some really amazing powers, but sometimes he isn't so great at using them super wisely. But that's part of the charm of Booster Gold as well.